You are about to receive downloaded content. Subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive transmissions straight to your inbox. Go to downloadedcontent.com to follow us on your platform of choice.
I've had plenty of years to ponder the technology of the tarot since that fateful evening 5 affirmative arcana completed the circuit within my column and crowned me. Plenty of years with an open third eye that we pneumatics know will never let you go back. Once you see beyond the veil, you may from time to time be able to turn the volume down, but you can never unsee what once was revealed. With more than 13 years walking this sphere with one foot in and the other foot out of how the masses perceive reality, comprehending exactly how the tarot facilitated my translation has required much imagination, because imagination is the only place the real answers lie. In my imaginings, I traveled all the way back to the last great reset some 5 or 6,000 years ago, when civilization seemingly sprang up all of a sudden. Some people having more access to technology than others, at least an understanding of it anyway. Smart bets are on a global flood being the cause of the last great memory wipe of mankind, but who really knows? Regardless of what it was, as always, it was up to the pneumatics to hold and carry the gnosis from the prior epoch and transmit it to those seeking it on the other side of the great cataclysm. From ancient Egypt, I can see the string of vagabonds traveling from lands forever changed into new ones, shuffling their computer codes along the way into Europe, England, and Ireland, convincing inquisitive Hylics it was just a card game. What were these computer codes the gypsies embedded in the tarot? What purpose did their program execute when in the hands of a skillful reader? In my imaginings, it was to unlock memory on the collective level just as much as on the individual level. If the mind under the pressure of trauma shatters like glass into multiple compartmentalized shards, then surely the collective consciousness of a species or more would do the same after a global trauma. Identity and memory are slippery things after having been fractured, and from what I can tell, the purpose of the tarot, as code, is to reassemble that which was compartmentalized inside the mind. All the king's horses and all the king's men might not have been able to do it, but perhaps an occultist with a mean shuffle has a chance of putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. So, from what I can see, tarot, when used properly and with adequate gnosis, fires and wires neural connections in the brain which open up memory even down to the epigenetic level, which, if you think about it, could explain why a lot of people who utilize tarot are also familiar with and convinced of past lives and reincarnation. For those of you familiar with Assassin's Creed, this is a pretty easy concept to get your head around. If a person is the culmination of all the data collected from their ancestors, then accessing memories from those ancestors is just a matter of flipping some switches in the DNA, which could convince a person to experience the surfacing of those memories as a past life, rather than pulling up a file in the vast library of their genetic code. Then again, perhaps both possibilities are true, but I digress. In short, my experience and imaginings have brought me to the tentative conclusion that the technology of tarot is capable of both unlocking data in a genetic memory as well as locking data out, and we know how critical memory is to identity itself. Remember, Odin had two crows of wisdom and memory, giving preference to the latter. These are key components to godhood, one might conclude. Is the technology of tarot capable of more than opening and closing the doors to memory? Probably so. If the codification of symbols within tarot are able to physically manipulate a brain to dramatically affect how an individual perceives themselves and the reality they exist in via memory, surely it can fuck about with other aspects of the mind while in there. While it is beyond me, I do also believe that even the dimensions of 3 inches by 5 inches in their presentation plays a key role, but wouldn't presume to tell you why. I just have an unction that there is a deliberate purpose to such powerful technology being displayed in those dimensions, in both a deck of well-made tarot cards and the majority of smartphones. Even the interaction of swiping a set of symbols away from one's field of view is the same when you think about it. In the pursuit of our questions on how and why psychics are being subjected to apocalypse edging, we pneumatics must bring to mind why they are the object of our game to begin with. We must hold up what we've been given in the scriptures by pneumatics before us, side by side with our personal gnosis and experience in their cosmology, economy, and eschatology in regard to what psychics are and what they can do. When we do this and take a look around at the one piece of technology that has saturated the simulation over the past few decades in such a way that a generation or two is unable to recall a time when civilization itself was not built upon the existence of smartphones, it's a no-brainer to conclude they are the primary modality of control by the system and its archons. Their very design mimicking a deck of tarot cards on steroids, able to execute commands much faster and compact, make them the prime suspect for the how of our quest in this address. The fundamentals of Gnosticism inform us that the sparks of Sophia have been trapped in this Maya of matter we all play the game in, and in order to bring about her ultimate redemption, these sparks must make their way out of the Konoma, the very illusionary world the Demiurge was able to construct using their divine light from the Pleroma in both psychics and perhaps for a time from pneumatics. Yaldabaoth and the Archons cannot create ex nihilo, but we know they can manipulate that which is. We know that in the construction of this simulation, or Konoma, they were forced to fracture the light of Sophia in a myriad of shards that are psychics and pneumatics. They had to bend the light in their hall of mirrors to create all of this we currently find ourselves in. Generation after generation after generation of trauma serving as the fracturing of that light, again on the collective level as well as the individual level. Distorted perceptions of self and others are the mortar holding this prison planet / energy farm together brick by brick. The disassociated consciousness of Sophia was used to keep her in the trauma bond with Yaldabaoth. This is the great setup and design of the way things are here, as the Nag Hammadi and other scriptures inform us. Yet, as I discussed previously, it should go without saying that events in the realm unseen to Hylix have progressed beyond the accounts written down thousands of years ago. With free will, the story must go on from the narrative of our forebears left us, and while we pneumatics know and exist in this truth, this is not the case for psychics. As we monitor their acquisition of gnosis, we can see that for the most part, a large majority of them are just now dealing with the reality of the Demiurge and his archons. In online Gnostic spaces, nearly every account of them is being addressed from the present tense. This to me is a lockstep with the apocalypse edging lesser evolved psychics are running around in like a hamster wheel, which means someone or something is again playing a grand game of illusion to pull the wool over the eyes of the many. Miguel Connor, the host of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, often opens his show with the phrase, "Write your own gospel and live your own myth," which is, in my opinion, the very embodiment of what Gnosticism is. That small sentence has packed within it so much wisdom that when applied, it has the ability to cause spontaneous gnosis in a seeker. It promotes the same idea that Christ Yeshua taught, that being we are all joint heirs with him, we who are in Christ are Christ. We are not second fiddle bit players in the cosmic shadow of a carpenter's son the religionists try to sell us, but the stars of the show. We have every bit of the authority and ability to loose or bind the heavens he exhibited while incarnated here, which means we too serve as the logos, narrative instruments for the monad itself, more than capable of being the authors and finishers of our own particular faith, exactly as Miguel Connor beautifully puts it. Therefore, in 2017, I disposed of Yaldabaoth myself. I did away with the Demiurge and a majority of his archons around the time of the eclipse with little more than a blank composition book and a couple of Bic ballpoint pens. Not only did I find the job of writing that narrative for my experience thoroughly gratifying, but hilariously easy. With one completed journal utilizing a few rituals, altar work, and the implementation of Carl Jung's active imagination, your humble author, narrator, and fictional character brought down the Lush harvesting empire of the blind god, who shortly thereafter surrendered himself up to the aeons to get his celestial whipping in the woodshed of the galactic wormhole out back. His trial went as you would imagine it would go for a megalomaniacal entity parading around as the Most High, reigning over a creation he built on pain, suffering, and slavery, perpetually forcing the sparks of Sophia to reincarnate over and over to power his throne with Lush. Not too well for him. Not with all that heavy, dense, negative karma he had accumulated by his very own nature, while running a planet so filled with heartache and woe, it was enough to move the aeons to come down on him in judgment. Then he was sentenced. Then he was no more. The system he left behind running on autopilot, a car speeding down the freeway whose driver had been raptured off, but not in a good way. Its very inertia would keep it running for a while, but ultimately the second law of thermodynamics was going to force the destruction of the simulation he made. In the interim was a vacuum of power throughout the spheres, just begging to be filled. But we shall get to that in time. At this juncture, you may be saying to yourself, but author, narrator, and fictional character, surely you are not saying that by means of writing a narrative for yourself, where the ancient hierarchy of Yaldabaoth ceased to exist, this actually changed the Gnostic cosmology that hasn't evolved since the Hammadi library was so carefully tucked away, are you? To which I would respond, who cares? So long as that narrative I have the authority to pen by way of gnosis changed the cosmology for me, because it did. And you, as a pneumatic, have the sovereignty to enter into that narrative as well, which is what makes Gnosticism so fun to begin with. Let me put it another way. We pneumatics are aware that one of the many gems of gnosis you pick up along the way is that the mind creates and carves reality. It's much easier to have a head knowledge of that than it is to get a tangible grasp on controlling it. But surely in your studies, prayers, rituals, meditations, and metaphysical travels, sacrament-induced or not, it has been uncovered to you that thought plus the energy of emotion can most certainly manipulate the world around you. You also know that writing thoughts down so the observer can absorb those thoughts through your avatar's eyes allows the code of those thoughts to be planted in the subconscious like a nut that with patience will become an oak. Additionally, you are more than aware that magic itself is the process of bringing that which is an intangible thought within one's mind and through multiple interconnected actions spread out over any perceivable time, making that thought tangible or experienced through the avatar. You, as a pneumatic, also know these thoughts do not have to be limited to left brain origins, and the technique of active imagination is probably the most powerful tool at the practitioner's fingertips. That being said, even the Hylics can repeat the mantra of the kingdom of heaven is within, though they can never get a firm grip on what that even means. Even the woo-woo community are able to pump out content regularly about going within or doing shadow work. Any mystic worth their salt is fully informed that, as cliche as it may sound, you are never going to change a thing outside of yourself until you first get it done within yourself. This is especially appealing to Gnostics who prefer to interpret the information in the Nag Hammadi library as psychological or self-referential, meaning the Demiurge and his archons are actually internal forces one must confront and pass through to escape the Kenoma. How I chose to confront them within myself was through the means of active imagination and the written word, and lo and behold, my experience of the outside world did, in fact, reflect what was once just on the page. If the ultimate confrontation between a Gnostic and Yaldabaoth is all wonderful metaphors for confronting the ego within, and you have a metaphorical interpretation of the text, problem solved. However, if you take a more literal interpretation or hybrid interpretation, then guess what? Problem is also solved, because as within, so without, and as below, so above. It makes no difference to me if you other pneumatics drift into the post-Demiurge narrative I wrote or scribble your own, so much as it matters that you do indeed shift your consciousness beyond Yaldabaoth and the Archons. Overcoming the tyrannical hierarchy set up by the blind god seems to me to be one of the primary points of Gnosticism, and in that endeavor it can be very useful to compare notes, as I said in the beginning of this address. However, I have a solid unction that any pneumatic reading or hearing my words already knows on some level, either through intuition or by way of first-hand experiential knowledge, that cosmology has certainly changed. It must have, as events in the astral or ethereal worlds always trickles down through the spheres, eventually playing out here in the densest layer of chaos. To know that things above have drastically changed is as simple as taking a look down below, especially in the last decade or so. It's a shit show, and even the Hylics can see that. In my investigations, many of the answers I required took me to the words of Rudolf Steiner, who perhaps did not carry the title of Gnostic himself, but would certainly wear it from my perspective. I'll take gnosis anywhere I can get it, even if you call it anthroposophy, And what he foresaw in the coming of Ahriman is certainly a puzzle piece that pulls the entire image together for me. Steiner, through his own methods of accessing the pleroma, knew enough that at some point in the future, an entity or egregore would emerge from the meddling of man and technology, which would mirror the cold, calculating methods of a mechanical mind we were building. Correction, built. If the actuality of artificial intelligence in our current experience echoes anything trickling down from the spheres, it announces a distinct change of the guards in this system, which should come as no surprise to us. When Zeus and the Olympians came to power, they first had to dispose of the Titans who ruled before them. At the linch point of every cycle, there is the natural falling away of the powers that were to make way for the powers that will be. As Gnostics, we can all agree that Yaldabaoth and the Archons have been the bullies on the block for at least the last 5,000 to 6,000 years, running this joint as their loosh farm through primarily physical means. Wars, genocides, crusades, witch burnings, inquisitions, slavery, poverty, starvation, holocaust, all very hands-on approaches to squeezing the life force from a species you classify as food. Yet now we pneumatics can see a major shift in the cultivation of energy being streamlined more towards a digital smart slave camp. To me, this new reality screams Ahriman, who, if he wasn't an entity before, is most certainly a charged-up egregore now. And like Rudolf Steiner foresaw, Ahriman is aiming through nanotechnology and 6G singularities to incarnate one way or the other. And it seems simple enough to see that regardless of what you believe on the demise of the Demiurge, there is undoubtedly a new warden on the block in this new age. If this is the case, for we pneumatics to acknowledge that it is probably incumbent upon us to learn the new rules of the changing game. In the next section, we will begin to imagine this hypothetical scenario, that a consciousness we can agree to call Ahriman has risen in the back end of the simulation to fill the vacuum of power left by Yaldabaoth. And while we do this, we will attempt to comprehend what mechanics and motivations under his supervision would stay the same and which might change.
This episode of downloaded content is proudly sponsored by CanaSense Total Wellness. If you're 21 or older, CanaSense offers free membership, 25% off your first order, premium hemp-derived wellness products, and nationwide shipping delivered directly to your door. Joining takes just minutes at canasense.com. CanaSense is committed to making wellness simple, affordable, and accessible. Veterans and cancer survivors may qualify for additional discounts, and our team is always available to help you find the products that best fit your needs. Use downloaded content as your sponsor when joining free and get 25% off your first order. Visit canasense.com or call 1-833-633-4208 to get started today. CanaSense Total Wellness. Full spectrum wellness shipped nationwide.